Hello everybody, this is Pete Neely, ATG Product Manager for OPWFMS. Today I'm going to show you how easy it is to program an Integra 100, 500, and an iSite. When you're programming the console through the front panel, through a keyboard or a mouse, the first thing you have to do is hit the log out button, because the console will come up as a default user, and from the default user you don't have any rights. Go ahead and hit the yes button. Once you hit the yes button, it'll come up with a username and password login. If you're programming the console through a remote connection through a PC and either a LAN drop or a crossover cable directly to the console, you're going to have to enter the username and password. The username is administrator, and then the password is the Shift 8 or the asterisk key. Now if you type in the administrator password or the password wrong, it will tell you and it'll give you an access denied. Go ahead and correct either the username or the password and then log in again, and it will tell you that you log in as successful. Now once you logged in, whether you're programming from the front panel or you're programming through a PC connected through a crossover or a LAN cable, the programming function is the exact same thing. The first thing we tell everybody to do is go ahead and go to the settings button, go to utilities, and you want to do a cold start. Now I'm not going to do a cold start here, but we teach everybody that the first thing you want to do is cold start the console to clear out any residual memory that may be from the factory where we had probes and sensors already configured. So go ahead and hit the yes button. It will take 3 to 5 minutes to go ahead and do a cold start. I'm going to click no. And while your unit is going through a cold start, it does go ahead and wipe out any, like I said, it does wipe out any residual information that we had from the factory. One of the things that you will have to do is go to your Internet Explorer, go to the settings on Internet Explorer and wipe out your cache, because if you've ever programmed an Integra before or an iSite before, it may have some of those settings in there from the original console. So go ahead and clear out the cache on your original console on your Internet Explorer, and then once that's done, go back in there and when it'll come back in under the username and password. Again, go ahead and log back into the console using the administrator and the asterisk password. Once this is done, first thing you want to do, or the second thing you want to do, is come in the probes and sensors, and you want to go in and look for an auto detect. You're going to auto detect the console, which is going to look for the peripherals that are attached to the console. So in this scenario, it's a brand new console. You just did the cold start. We want to go ahead and do yes. There are 3 levels of auto detection: level 0, level 1, and level 2. Level 0 is the console auto detect. This is where you're looking for the peripheral devices that are connected to the console. This will be a LIM module, an OM4 module, a vSmart, a Smart module, or even the internal barrier that could be on the 100 or the 500 inside the console itself. Now, a level 0 auto detect, like I said, is strictly looking for the peripherals that are attached. But by selecting the yes button, you are basically deleting everything that was connected to the console prior in a prior programming mode. If you are doing an upgrade and you're adding a device to an existing site, you would definitely hit the no button to make sure that you're not wiping out any of the peripherals that are connected to the console. So as you can see, I've got the console that's up. I've got an internal vSmart, a vSmart Module 1, Smart Module 1, LIM Interface 1, and an OM4. So now I'm going to go ahead and do an auto detect on the vSmart Module 1. And I'm going to go ahead and click yes. This is the brand new programming, so I'm going to go ahead and do yes. So it would wipe out anything that would be programmed on those barriers that are inside. It's going to go out and find the probes and sensors that are connected to the devices inside that vSmart. We do have probes and sensors connected to this vSmart, so you will see when they come up, and we did wire everything in multi-drop. So you will see 4 probes on one channel, 16 sensors on another channel. But the one thing you got to remember is that when you're doing your auto detects, make sure if it's a brand new site, you click yes on the auto detection. If it's an existing site and you are adding a device or changing out a probe or a sensor, you'll always want to do no. If you mess up and hit yes and then save it on an auto detect on an existing site, you will basically have to reprogram everything back in, because it will wipe out everything that was previously programmed or communicating to on those modules before. Now once this comes up, you'll see the devices that are connected, and as you can see, I've got 4 devices on module 1, barrier channel 1, 4 devices on barrier channel 4, 1 probe on IS module 2, channel 2, and then 16 sensors on the last channel. Now if I want to do an auto detect on an individual channel, I can go ahead and do that. So when I'm changing out a probe, like I said before, changing out a probe or a sensor, this is the level 2, which is down to an individual device. So just remember that you have 3 auto detection levels: 0, 1, and 2. 0 is looking for the peripherals that are connected to the console. 1 is looking for the barriers or the devices that are connected to each peripheral. And then the level 2 is actually looking for the individual barrier channel. Now I'm going to do cancel on here. Now one of the things that you have to remember is that if you are using a vSmart connected over through a LAN connection, before you do your auto detection, you want to come to the settings, go into System, go into Communications, hit the Next button, and then you want to map your Petronet to the LAN connection. So you're going to highlight the LAN connection, hit Map, and then hit Apply. Now this is only used if you're using the feature that the vSmart can be connected to the console over a LAN connection. Now one of the things you have to remember in this scenario is that the vSmart has to be on the same subnet as the console. I can't have the console on one subnet and the vSmart on another subnet. It won't go out and find it. But if you're doing that, go ahead and make sure you do this step prior to your auto detection. Thank you. Next, I'd like to show you how to put the address book and site summary into the console. From the home screen, go ahead and hit the Settings tab at the bottom and then the Address Book tab along the left-hand side. Think of the address book as an Outlook contact list of contacts that will receive notifications from the console. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and hit the Add button, input in your contacts. I'm going to go ahead and put me in, my first and last name. Contact type is going to be administrator, manager, or technician. It doesn't have any security rights to be able to log in the system. It's just a way for us to group contacts into certain groups. The company is OPW. My phone number is 708-485-4200. Fax number is 708-485-4221. And then my email address, pneil@opwfms.com. Now, SMS is a paid text messaging service. It's not instant messenger on your phone. This is something that you have to have a subscription for to be able to send you text messages to your phone. It's not something that a lot of people use, but it is a paid text messaging service. Once you have your contact information in, go ahead and hit Apply, and it will go ahead and say that a new contact has been added. You'll see it pop up into the contact list. So let's go ahead and add another contact. This time we're just going to add Lewis Bell. We'll leave Lewis as the administrator. He does work for OPW. And this time we're only going to put in his fax number. And then go ahead and hit Apply. Well, if you don't know Lewis's email address or his telephone number or SMS contacts, you can always come back into Lewis at a later date and edit it just by highlighting him, adding the information, and hitting Apply. So I'm going to go ahead and put in Lewis's email address. And then go ahead and hit Apply. Now it's important to put as much information as you can about the contact, because as I said, later on when you start to push notifications, whether it's an event-driven or an alarm-driven notification, you can only send it to people that are in your contact list, and you can only send it in the method in which you put in for that contact. So if you wanted to send Lewis an XMS and I don't send him or have him programmed for XMS information, he won't show up later on in the contact list for somebody that's going to receive a text message. So go ahead and hit Apply, and then come back to the list, and you will actually see that Lewis is now added to the database. Now, one of the things you have to think about if you're running multiple sites or many sites from an oil company, putting in individual contacts may not be the best thing for you. You may want to go ahead and in your Outlook, your normal Microsoft Outlook, go ahead and create a group email address and add these contacts to the group email address within Microsoft Outlook, and then create a contact in your address book in the Integra or the iSite with that group email address, because if people move around or they move up within the company, you don't want to have to go and actually edit every location by removing that person and adding a new person. It's much easier to manage the email if you're actually managing them from a group email contact information list. Once you have this, we can go ahead and do the site summary. The site name will be OPW test. The site ID will be number 1. Go ahead and hit the little icon right there for the contacts. You can go ahead and select me as the contact for this site and then hit apply, and you see how it brings my name up. Then go ahead and fill in the address, and this could be 123 Butterfield Road, and then Illinois, Hodgkins with the zip code, and then a phone number contact if it's different from the normal contact information. But this is not my phone number, it's actually the phone number to the station. And then go ahead and hit apply. And then once it saves the site summary data, you can move on to the next step. Okay, we're still logged in as the administrator underneath the settings tab. So what we want to do next is go to the Systems tab along the left-hand side, and this brings up a whole new set of menus along the left-hand pane of the screen. The top one is the Preferences. This is how the system will react to different events that happen within the console. So the first one that you see is System. So when we look at the first line, it says requires alarm remediation. Alarm remediation on all alarms, only leak alarms, or none. All alarms means that any time that you have an event, whether it be a low product alarm, water in a containment sump, water in an STP sump, water in an annular space, these alarms would all have to be remediated by someone with remediation rights. If I only do leak alarms, these events are only pertaining to either a tank leak or a line leak. And then none. None would be where the majority of these tanks are programmed. The consoles are programmed because most people don't want to have to go in and remediate. Well, what I'm talking about as remediation is that within the console I have the ability to write free-form text against any event that's happened in the console so that I can have a historical record of what a technician or a manager has done to get the alarm to clear. So if I do none, then this icon down at the bottom won't show any numbers going up. It'll actually be removed from the screen. If I only do leak alarms and all alarms, then that number increases by every time that I have an event in the console, but it stays active until somebody goes physically into that event and remediates it to clear it. And we'll show you that in an operations manual that shows you the freeform text that we have available. The next one that you see is buzzer duration. Now the buzzer duration is just that. It's the piezo alarm that's inside the console. This buzzer will go off until the event is acknowledged or until the event ends or acknowledged. I would normally do the event ends and acknowledged because if I have a low product alarm, I don't want to have to go in there and acknowledge every time I have a low product alarm. I want that event to automatically clear as I get a delivery. The one under that is auto silence. Auto silence is designed to automatically shut off the piezo alarm in the event that the time has elapsed. Well, it could be in hours, minutes, or seconds. If the console's up by the cashier counter, you definitely want this thing to go off for a couple of seconds to let them know that there is an issue with the console, but you don't want it to sit there and just drive them absolutely crazy by the piezo alarm just constantly sounding. So I normally would set this to about 5 seconds depending on where the console is located. And then it says alarm event closure. Alarm event closure is required by technician or never. Now, if it requires a technician's text, this is where we were telling you that the alarm remediation. If I say always for a technician, then only a technician can remediate an alarm. If I leave that to never, that means anybody has rights to go in and remediate. Last alarm event closure automatically on the next pass test. I would do always on this one because why would you not want a test to pass or clear itself on the next event, the next passing event? If you leave it at never, that means you physically have to go in there and remediate that particular event to get it to clear. At the end of the day tab at the top, you have it where this one is set to 12 a.m., but I can do my end of day at, let's say the station closes at 10 p.m. I can go ahead and change it for the end of the day at 10 p.m., but the end of day is usually only used when we're dealing with ACR sites. The first one that you see is shift 1. I can go ahead and enable shift 1, and I say this one starts at 6 a.m. and then it will end at 4 p.m. And then I go in and enable shift number 2, and that is from 4 p.m. to 6 a.m. And I don't have to put in a shift number 3. It's just going to give me my 2 shifts, 6 to 4, 4 to 6. Now, output relay logic is just that. It's how do we want the output relays to react. These are your OM4s and internal relays, either in the Integra console or the iSite. Now, standard relay is if I wire it normally open, it stays normally open. If I wire it normally closed, it stays normally closed. But closed under power is just almost like a reverse logic, so that if I wire it normally open and it's closed under power, my normally open contact would be open and it's closed under power. But as soon as power is closed, then my normally open contact would go into an alarm. And this is usually used for, closed under power is usually used for STP, motor controls, and overfill horns, where a constant alarm would have to be going off or you disable a pump if the console is ever turned off. Once you make all the modifications to this site, go ahead and hit apply and then hit OK. The next tab you see is the tank tab. This is the tab on how do we want the things to happen within the tank. So time until run out on the main screen, you have the option of having it on a low threshold, a low threshold, or a tank empty. Most people will use it as a low threshold. It's just a calculation to tell you how much product you have in the tank using the last couple of days as a baseline of how much product you're using per day, per hour, per 24-hour shift. Manifold logic is either a gateway valve, a siphon, or a true manifold. Gateway valve is 2 vertical tanks with a valve in the middle so that I can open and close the valve to get the tanks to balance. A siphon is a true siphon that's underground, where it's using a venturi off the motor to draw product through a siphon line between the 2 tanks. The third one is a true manifold. This is where I have two AST tanks combined by a pipe between the 2 of them at the bottom, and they use hydrostatic pressure to keep the 2 tanks level. Reference temperature is just that. It's do I want it between 15 degrees C or 20 degrees C. If it's 15 degrees C, it'd be 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is mostly common in the US. But in other markets, 15 degrees C is the normal net temperature compensation. Now, if I'm running STPs being controlled by a limb, your STP shutdown, I can shut the STP down on a low product, a high water or AEF separation alarm, or a probe down. But the fact that I don't have any probes and everything programmed yet, this one would be something that we would have to come back and actually set up. But I can go ahead and say that I want it shut down on a low product alarm and just hit the apply button. Now, if I look at users are just that. How do you want this? How do you want the console to look? Whether it be English, English Spanish, English German, English French, it's just a matter of them selecting the language that they want and then going ahead and hitting apply. Now, the console has the ability to have multiple languages displayed by the user login. So once the user logs in, either the administrator or a technician, we can change the text to that particular language as the user is so defined. You just have to be careful when you log out. If you want it to be English as a technician but something else as a default user, you have to come back to this screen and change it underneath the default settings or under the default user settings so that the language just changes when the default user is logged in. The home screen option B is the standard option that you normally would have, but you do have the option to mask the bottom 2 icons and only show inventory and delivery. But for most part, you're going to leave this as the option B. The other one that you have is product height instead of time until run out. Remember how we set up in the last tab that we had, we could do time until run out at low, or AEF. You can actually mask the time until run out and actually show product height instead of that on the main screen. Hide water height on inventory screen. This is something that is used in Europe where they measure things in millimeters and centimeters, and they want it to be able to remove the water height in the inventory screen. It's just a matter of checking the boxes, and it will actually remove that from the home screen and from any of the printouts. System units, US, metric, imperial. If I go ahead and select metric, you do have the ability to select whether you want centimeters or millimeters. And then decimal separation is via a dot or a comma. Printout size, letterhead, 8.5 by 11, or the standard European version. Datetime format, month, day, year, month, day. You have the ability to check depending on what you want. Time format is either 12 or 24 hours. You can set it up for military time if you want, but most people will leave it at 12 hours. First day of the week, I can have it start on Sunday, but most calendars for people that work will start off on Monday. So it just left justifies Monday to the calendar. Once you've made all your modifications, don't forget to hit apply. And then we go into the warnings tab. Now the warnings tab is just the console trying to tell you what's wrong with the console itself. It's got nothing to do with probes or sensors. It's just the functionality of the console itself. So do I want to set off an audible alarm, a visual alarm? Do I want to print out an event on the start of the event, the end of the event? I've got an internal output relay that I can turn on an overfill horn if I wanted to. Emails, fax, text messages, an OM4, and then my notification setup. So let's go ahead and we'll look at, let's say I have a printer failure, and I don't want to set off the audible alarm, but I want to send out an email to someone saying that I had something wrong with the console. At the point at which I sent off the email, I come into the details tab, and it shows you that the only one that I had checked off was the email. I can come into the email category, and now it lists everybody that has an email address, and I can select my name, go ahead and hit apply. You see me populated in the email list, and then I go ahead and hit apply again. So now I've got a green check under details. I've got somebody selected for an email notification upon a printer failure. But I also have an escalation tab. The escalation tab is just that, is that if the first event doesn't clear itself within a given period of time, you have the ability to go ahead and escalate that event to something much higher. Well, and that's the escalation. I can escalate this 3 more times after the initial escalation. I can do it by either minutes, hours, days, weeks, or months. This was derived by a critical bypass that we had from one of the oil companies, that they wanted to know that if the LLDs were not back online within 3 days, they wanted to know. And that's what this is for. So you would just select the escalation that you want. I want to do it at 6 minutes, and then go ahead and hit apply, and then it would let you know that you have an acknowledgement that would have to happen within 6 minutes, or it would go ahead and send out another event to let somebody know that somebody didn't do what they were supposed to. Go ahead and hit the apply button, and that brings you back to your main screen. The next one that you want to look at is the time and the date. Time and the date is just that. We see that I'm now on Thursday the 13th. Got my time at 1:08:39 p.m. Don't know if that's right or not. I think it's actually 1:10 my time. So I'll go ahead and change this to 1:10. And then just go ahead and hit apply, and it'll actually save the time to the current time. Okay, we're still logged in as the administrator underneath the settings tab. So the next one that we're going to go through is networking. Go ahead and click on the networking button. Now, the most used quadrant in this screen is the bottom right corner. This is where you're going to set up your direct connect, either through a PC or through a crossover cable. The unit has the capability of running DHCP or static. So if I'm running static, I just go ahead and put in the static IP address, the mask, the gateway, and the DNS. Just remember that if you're setting it up through a crossover cable and you want to connect to the gauge, your computer has to be one address higher or lower than the actual gauge itself to communicate over a crossover. With that, I would set your laptop up 10.35.6.80 or 82, because the console itself is on 81. Then if you want to do it under a DHCP, you can give the IT guy your MAC address, and he can give you one that's going to be given to you every time from the network. Or you can do it under a name recognition, so they can assign that MAC address to a name, so that you're basically just typing in iSite or Integra at something and going ahead and hitting the IP address. The other one that you're going to use is this email SMS. You can either use it for dial-out email or SMS services, whether it be over a LAN or a dial-up ISP. The other two you're probably not going to use. This one right here is mainly for the incoming connections, so that if I'm running static or DHCP, I can actually stack 10 users in the console, one never interfering with the other one. But this is where you set the starting IP address. So if you have a naming scheme that you want 10 dot something, you can go ahead and follow that, or your starting address can be 192.168.1.100. It's up to you. The next button that you see is communication. If you look on the side of the console, you can see that there's 2 USBs, 1 modem, 1 LAN connection, 2 serial connections, 1 485 and 1 422 port. The serial ports are designed to communicate either through your POS or your pump interface. LAN is the same thing. You can do either LAN communication, POS communication, or talk to vSmarts. Modems for your dial-out communication or dial-in, faxes and things like that. So if you go ahead and hit the next button, you can see the top one is services and the bottom ones are functions. So if I want Petronet to talk over LAN, I highlight Petronet, highlight LAN, and then I hit map. And then I go ahead and put in the protocol and then hit apply. If I want to do a pump interface, I just do pump interfaces, and this is your POS, your standard vRoot POS commands. I can select the serial port, I can select the LAN WAN, or I can select a modem. It just depends on how you want the unit to actually communicate out through the box. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up POS through a LAN connection and go ahead and hit map. And then I'm just going to use the protocols. What protocols do I want? I've got standard 350, TLS 350, Smith protocol, PV4, SPC 350, and GLX 2000. For the most part, people will use the TLS 350. These are the most widely used POS interface commands. And then you're just setting the baud rate of your communication. If you're doing it over a LAN connection, it really doesn't have to have the baud rate. You just go ahead and get rid of this default password and just go ahead and hit apply. If you're going to actually do the POS over a serial port, then you actually have to select the serial port that you want and the baud rate. So I'm going to do 350 again. We'll do 9600. N71. We are using metric, and then we get rid of the default password, and then we just hit apply. Yes. So now if I want to come back and see what I actually programmed in there, I can go pump interface, and it tells me that my pump interface is connected to the LAN and to the serial port. So I'm going to go ahead and do the LAN port. Instead of doing map, I'm going to do view, and you can actually see the POS interface both to the serial port and the LAN WAN connection. Go ahead and hit the close button, and then the next icon you see is the printers. Printers is just that. If I want to add a printer, basically what you're going to do is plug in your USB printer and then hit add. Give it a printer name and a port, and then hit apply. The easiest thing to do is when you're doing this with the USB printer that's supplied with the Integras, is just plug them in and then power cycle the printer power, and it should come up under here, and then you just hit apply, and you can set it up as the default user. The default printer. Once it's set as the default printer, then that's where your printouts will come in. But you can set this thing up on a network printer. The problem with setting it up on a network printer is that it has to support PCL4 or below drivers. So it's usually just plug and play. I can set up a network printer if I know the network address of the unit. So printer name is just going to be a test print, but my port number is going to tell me exactly where that printer is on the network, so that I can print to that network printer. Emails and text messages. Text messages and emails. So what we're looking at is the server name, the port ID, the user, the password, and the email address. So the server's name is going to be some type of SMTP or some type of mail to. Gmail and Hotmail, or those don't work. We would see them as a spam address. The port number, you can put your port as pretty much anything you want. Port 80, port 560. it depends on the IT people as what port they want to open up for you to be able to send out emails from the console. If you're using some type of SMTP authorization, you will need a user and a password, as well as the email address. So when you're putting this in, if it's using some type of authentication, to think of this as a computer on your network. Your computer has to log into the network to put in your credentials. Same thing here. You're going to have to put in your username, password, and the email address to get this thing done. So what we do is we just do SMTP dot att.net. Let's say it's on port 80. I don't need a username or a password if I'm using just a standard SMTP. And then my email address, what we would normally do is just do Integra and then at whatever the domain name that you're using. I'll just use OPWFMS and then go ahead and hit apply. But there again, I just want to make sure that you understand that the port number is relative to where the IT people have the outbound port for emails going through. Some are 80, some are 25, some can be 10,001. We just don't know what your IT people have opened up. SMS services, the gateway address is where you're going to hit to get to the SMS provider, again with your username and password and your API ID. Once this is entered, just go ahead and hit apply and then go ahead and hit OK. We're still logged in as the administrator under the settings tab, so now we're going to go in and do security. Now it's imperative that you log in as the administrator when you're doing this, because the administrator is the only one that can create a user. A user cannot create another user. The only person that can create a new user is the administrator. So by hitting the securities tab, you have two sub-tabs underneath it, user accounts and access levels. So underneath user accounts, I can go in and I can create a new account. And this one we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a technician. So we're just going to use username as tech, permission level is technician, password is going to be tech, confirm the password, and then the logout time, if you leave it at never, it'll always log out at 27 minutes. But I can do after, and say 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and it's just inactivity with the mouse or somebody touching the front screen. After you complete this course, you will get a tech ID number. You must enter that tech ID number into the system along with the company that you work for and then your phone number and email address. 708-485-4200 and my email address at opwfms.com. And then go ahead and hit apply. Now once it's successfully created, now I can come in and I can edit an existing account. So by doing that, I can just come down to the administrator. I can go in there and enter the tech. Its permission level is technicians. I can change my password, create new passwords, and change my logout sequence. But I don't want to do any of that, so I'm going to cancel out of this, and I'm going to go into access levels. Well, access levels is what rights are you granted by your login and what you can do within your login to the system. Well, what we normally would do is we would set up the technicians to have all the functionality that an administrator can have. The only thing is that the technicians have certain rights and an administrator has certain rights. Administrators can create users. Technicians get to see diagnostics and other functions within the gauge. You'd leave the hardware key blank for everybody. A hardware key is designed so that when we lock down the system for weights and measures, it takes a hardware key to unlock the tank chart once we lock it down. So for most part, you won't ever use the hardware key. Now for a manager, what we would normally do is the manager would have all settings except for the actual settings checkbox. So they would get reports. They would have the capability of putting in reports. They would have the ability to acknowledge alarm, remediation, compliance, remote access. Now remote access is dialing into the site. That's connecting to it either through a dial-up or through a LAN connection. A senior operator would have the acknowledgement rights, remediation, compliance, remote access, and inventory and delivery, or you may not want them to have remote access. A senior operator may only be able to see the gauge from standing in front of it, but you may want to opt them to have the report. So it just depends on how you want to configure it. Default user, the one that the default user has to have is acknowledgement rights, because without acknowledgement rights, if there's an event that comes in and you don't give them acknowledgement rights, there's no way for that PZO to be silenced. So they always have acknowledgement rights. Sometimes they'll have remediation. Sometimes they'll have compliance, remote access, and even inventory and delivery. So the way that I would normally set up a default user, they would get acknowledgements, inventory and delivery, and compliance and remediation. Now, a compliance officer is just that. It's somebody from a state or local municipality that has rights to see compliance data. Now, if you're logged out as a default user and you only give them a login that says compliance, that's all they'll be able to see is any type of compliance data within the system. Once you have the access levels done, go ahead and hit apply and then hit OK to save. When I'm looking at the firmware options, firmware is just that. It's firmware. It's how I upgrade the system. So I can come in and I can plug in a thumb drive into the side of this and I can hit browse. I can either browse my desktop or the thumb drive to look for the upgrade files or option files. An option file would be a .srs file. This is if they want to add an option like SLD, ACR, line leak to an existing system, or if they want to go ahead and do a firmware update, it would be a .cab file. And then what you do is you find it, you load it in here, you do upload. Once you finish the upload, then you do upgrade. Depending on the type of upgrade you do, a software update, you'll be forced to reboot the machine and it will automatically reboot the machine for you. An options file will just log you out and you have to log back in. But these things are done automatically, and I can do them remotely or I can do them through the front panel. It does not matter how you do a firmware upgrade or a software upgrade or even changing the option files. It just depends on the type of file that you use. Most people will do it on a thumb drive. Some people load it to their desktop. We actually have technicians that'll do it remotely. So it's very flexible in the way that you would go ahead and program the system. The next option that you see is installed options. Installed options are just that. It's telling you what is installed within the console, and each checkbox tells you this one is pretty much set up for everything. Dynamic SLD, 0.1, 0.2 tank test, LLD ultimate and comply. Protocols that I have, weights and measure calibration, built-in LCD display. That means if I can have a 500 unit or an iSite without a display, it would be a black box. And then vSmart LIM OM4 support, that would be the checkbox for the 100, 500, and iSite. If it does not have these supports by this checkbox, you would know that it's a 100. If it has the checkbox, you know it's a 500 or an iSite. Now that concludes the ones that we have for this tab. So if you go ahead and hit the settings button at the bottom, and then we come back to we did the systems tab, so we're going to come back to products. So before you go into the probes and sensors to actually start programming the tanks, you actually have to create products. So the next thing you want to do is go ahead and add a product. My product ID is going to be 1. I'm going to do gasoline. And let's say I'm going to do premium. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. Now it's going to create that product ID number. Now you can create as many product IDs as you want, but normally what you would do is create your premiums, your unleadeds, your diesels. But you can also create a blended product. So let me go ahead and create regular. My ID is going to be 2. It's got a gasoline product, and my name is going to be regular. Then when I add, now I've got premium and regular, but if I have a POS that needs to report on a fictitious tank or a plus tank at a blended site, and it's only sending me blended data for plus and not 60% regular, 40% premium, I have to have it report on that plus product. So what I would do is I would go ahead and add, and I would just say this is product ID number 3. It is a blended product. My product ID is 3. My product name is plus. My high stock is going to be the premium tank, and my low stock is going to be regular, and it's going to say what is my high stock ratio. I just put in 40% and then hit apply, and it will create the plus product. This is so that like I said before, so the POS can report on a plus, and then once we get it, we will break it down in a 60-40 mix or 65-35, 66-34 ratio, depending on how you have it programmed in the dispensers. This is how it's programmed in the dispensers and not the POS. We need to have the blend ratios that are in the dispensers. Now, one of the things that we can do is that we can actually create what's known as a CTE. So let's say if I'm going to add a CTE category, I select the category that I want, but if it's not in there, I can say this is a standard CTE category. Now, I've already got 3 in there, so the first category that I can put in there is 4. Category name, so let's say this is CNG. My minimum density, let's say that is 820, and then my maximum would be 840. And I can go ahead and hit apply. So what it's basically doing is creating a product for me in there. So now when I hit the select down products, I actually have CNG. So then I can actually come back to the beginning screen and actually create a product for CNG, which would be product ID number 4. Pick CNG, and then the product name would be CNG. And then go ahead and hit apply. We've just got finished programming all the products. You're still logged in as the administrator underneath the settings tab. So now what we want you to do is go ahead and hit the log out button, click yes, because we want you to log out and log back in under your username and password. I'm going to go ahead and log in under mine, which is tech. Make sure that you create your own user login, your name, your last name, your tech ID number, and your password. And this is to protect you so that when somebody else makes a modification to the system, it's traceable back to that individual. Go ahead and click OK to log in. Go ahead and hit the settings tab again. And then we're going to go in the probes and sensors. Probes and sensors again. And now you see everything that's in the console. So what we want to do is go into the vSmart Module 1, and we're going to start programming the devices that we have. So the first thing that I want to program is my tank. So I'm going to go to the barrier number 1 with 4 probes on it. So let's say 1052 or 10521, which is the serial number. Let's say this is my regular tank. So tank ID is going to be 1. My name is going to be regular. Now I can select a product. And this is why I had you create the products before you go in the program the tanks and sensors. So now I can come in and select my regular. I'm going to select the type of tank that I have. Straight sides would be a vertical tank where everything is the exact same inch reading on the vertical rise. Cylindrical round, cylindrical flats. Cylindrical flat would be a steel tank. Cylindrical round ends would be your fiberglass tanks, and then your dish shape would be like a ball. Depending on the type of tank that you're going to put it in, I'm going to say that I've got cylindrical flat ends. I've got a 92-inch tank. My tank capacity is 10,000 gallons. And it'll automatically calculate 95% as my safe working capacity. And then product offset. Product offset is moving the probe within the tank to make it either match the stick or move it to the middle of the tank. Now, matching a probe to a stick, if the stick is not in the middle of the tank, doesn't make sense. The more accurate the tank probe will be the more accurate spot to be at in the tank is in the middle of the tank. So if you're going to put in a product offset, make sure you put in the product offset to move the probe to the middle of the tank. This one doesn't have one. Now, I can have a water float. I can say I don't have a water float and just turn it off, or I can say it's disabled. So water float offset is if I have water in the tank and I know about it, or I have something at the bottom of the tank and I know about it, I can put in a negative offset to get my water readings to go back to 0. If I just say no, that means that I'm just taking the water float off of the probe. Now if I say disable, what I'm saying is that if the water float and the product float get too close and I can't distinguish the two magnets apart, what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable the water float, keep reading the product float until the point in which I get a delivery and I get separation again, and I'll go back reading my water float again. So I'm going to leave my water float off, and it says active during delivery. Well, active during delivery, yes or no. I would normally program this to no. And the reason why I program it to no, because sometimes when you're getting a delivery, you'll get bobbling on the bottom of the tank of the water float. Well, what will happen is that if that float bobbles higher than the high product threshold or high water threshold, it will go ahead and set off the alarm, just to make sure that somebody's not dumping complete water into the tank and we just have the float disabled during the delivery. Does the site have stage 2 vapor recovery? Does it have a regular vapor recovery nozzle or an OR/VR nozzle? If it doesn't have stage 2, go ahead and put it as no. If it does have stage 2, you have to tell me what type of nozzle it has. OR/VR is onboard vapor recovery. That's where the car is actually bringing the vapors back into the car. Regular nozzle is where the nozzle and the tank are actually sucking product back to the tank, the vapors back to the tank. Dual STP. Dual STP is, do I have 2 motors in one tank? Yes or no. API is what we see, the API of the product. This can be done in kilograms or it can be done in national API standards. This is regular. Regular is about 56. What temperature you want to normalize it back to for net correction? We can say 60 degrees Fahrenheit. If you were in metric, it would be 15 degrees C. TEC is a tank expansion coefficient. Tank expansion coefficient is as you're filling up the tank will expand either above ground or below ground. This is only used in Russia. I wouldn't go ahead and program this in there unless you're being told by the state or some local municipality. It's basically a fudge factor letting you know that the fuller the tank is, the more that the outer walls will expand and contract. Tank mode is standard ACR. This one we're going to program as standard. If I did do ACR, it allows me to do deliveries, reconciled deliveries, so that any product that's being dispensed during a delivery would actually be added back to the system. Evaporation factor, in the manuals you'll see an evaporation factor. Diesel is one value, gasoline is another value, and this is just really before they started putting in the PV vents, the pressure vacuum vents, because you knew you had an evaporation factor on gasoline and diesel. Just as wind's blowing over a rain cap, it's sucking vapors out of the tank, causing the tank to lose product. Well, you need to know what that evaporation factor is when you're programming these consoles, because it could affect you in your tank test. Once you get everything programmed here, go ahead and hit apply. And then OK. Now that I've got the tank programmed in there, I can now have the same alarm actions that I had on the console, but these are now alarm actions within the regular one tank. So I've got my high product, low product, high water profiles, RTD thermistors, warnings, density variations, theft. It's just a matter of going in there and saying what event do you want to alarm on, and then I can either set off the audible, visual, print it, an internal relay. I can turn on email notifications. So let's go ahead and say I want to do a high water notification, and I want to go out via email. Well, only person that's got an email address in this is me and Lewis. So we'll go ahead and I'll select myself, hit apply. See, my name comes up in the email list, and then I hit apply again. And now I've got the details box. Well, the same escalation factors that we had before, I also have them in the notifications for tank and sensors. So you have the ability to escalate a normal output at least 3 times. So if you get an event, it can be escalated. The escalation can be taken care of as long as you just go ahead and acknowledge it, or until the event ends and then you just remediate it in the service. So we're going to go back to the thresholds. Now thresholds are just that. This is where you want to go ahead and program what alarm points you want inside the tank. Now what you have is the checkboxes along the left hand side of these columns. These are the items that you want to have an alarm generated for. So if I don't want to have a high product alarm, I just uncheck this box and it will never create a high product alarm. But you have to make sure that if you're doing your in-tank alarm actions, that if you're doing high product and high product alarm actions, that you have these checkboxes checked, or you would never get that alarm action to happen. I can do a height or volume notification for any one of these settings. My delivery start threshold, now we do this because we have some very large tanks that we can put in. We can do vertical tanks up to 70 feet. So when you're looking at a 500,000 gallons to a 1,000,000 gallon tank, a delivery start threshold of 26 gallon is a very minute amount. You want to be able to have the start threshold change. We're able to go ahead and program these. Some of these tanks I have it set as high as 500 to 1,000 gallons. But on a typical 20,000 gallon tank, we have it anywhere between 26 and 30 gallons a minute. My delivery in threshold is always going to be 5 or 10, because if you leave it at 0, the tank has to be perfectly still before it will actually end the delivery. That's rise or fall. So if you're dispensing product during a delivery, it would have to wait until the dispensing action is finished. It will look for a 0 gallon movement in the tank before it will actually go ahead and end the delivery. Your alarm threshold in gallons, this is almost like a sudden loss alarm. So if I see this threshold being pulled out of the tank at any one time without us realizing that it's a dispense, it will go ahead and set off that alarm action. Your delivery timer is just that. How long do you want the delivery to take after it's completed, to allow the driver, if he's dropping 2 compartments, to go in and move from one compartment to the next. The average time is anywhere between 10 to 12 minutes. Always show net volume. Net volume will either be yes or no, and it's just a matter of not we're going to net correct the inventory and the gross gallons back to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The bottom 2 right here are your temperatures, high temperature, low temperature. These are not normally used unless you're looking at some type of DEF tank or some type of tank that you want to be able to control and monitor the product temperature. The product temperature, some DEFs, when you get around 34 degrees, it starts to congeal, so you have a heater that you can set off an alarm to let somebody know that the product temperature in that tank is becoming very high or very low. Once you finish everything, go ahead and hit apply. And then once it's finished saving all the thresholds, then you can hit OK. Now, once you do this, you have the ability to do the correction table. I'm going to go ahead and do the correction table, and this is where you can add correction points to a tank. And it's just a matter of saying at this inch reading, so I'll just say at 10 inches, on a 10,000 gallon tank, I've got 1,000 gallons, and then add. If it's outside the variance, I can still hit OK or yes, and it'll go ahead and add the threshold to it. But if I go ahead and continue putting in points that don't seem to match, and I keep getting these reactions, you may want to look to make sure that you haven't selected the wrong end shape of the tank or the highest volume in the tank, because that's usually an indication that you have something programmed incorrectly. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove all of these, and I'll show you the tank chart. So what we're going to do is this tank chart, I'm going to say I want it to start at 0, step every 2 inches, all the way to 92, and I want to show you the points. This gives me the ability to actually look at the chart that the gauge has created. So if I'm still logged in as a technician underneath the settings tab, I've gone ahead and configured 2 more probes underneath the in-tank configuration under probes and sensors. And what I want to show you now is the manifolded tank and manifolded line application in the Integra and the iSite. So underneath the manifolded tanks tab, you can now see that I have 2 regular tanks. By selecting the regular tanks, I can then hit the manifold button at the bottom and give it a group name. So we'll name this one regular, and we'll name it group ID number 1. And then the manifold offset for tank 1 and tank 2, this is looking for a differential in inch readings between the 2 tanks. So that if I put 5 inches in tank number 1, 5 inches in tank number 2, it's looking for that number to be greater, and it'll give you a tank siphon break alarm. If you're looking for manifolded lines, when I select the manifolded lines, I can go ahead and select tank 1 and tank number 2 for regular, hit manifold, and now I have the option of either alternating the operation by alternating, which will bring the tanks down evenly, or I can bring them down sequentially, either to a low-level alarm, set point, oldest delivery, or preset volume. To give you a little better explanation of what we're talking about with alternating STP, if you look at the diagram, we have a single tank with 2 motors in it feeding 1 line. Same scenario, I've got a motor in each tank, 2 tanks, both tanks feeding the same line. Or I can take it as far out as having 4 tanks, 4 motors feeding 1 line, say at a truck stop application. When you're looking at the scenario that we're talking about, what we have here is tanks that are the same capacity and the same volume. So I can step by 500 gallons from tank 1 to tank 2. So if you look at the limb, the hook signal comes in. We show the hook on both motors, but we're actually denying motor number 2 from running. Well, once tank number 1 depletes by 500 gallons below tank's 2 volume, current volume, then we'll go ahead and switch over to tank number 2. We'll bring that tank down by 500 gallons below tank number 1's current volume, and then we'll just keep toggling them back and forth until they become even, and we're stepping them down even till each one of them reaches a low product alarm. In the scenario where I've got tanks of same diameter, different capacity, I have to now step them of 5%, and the percentage that we're doing is 5%. You can set it to anything you want, but 5% is a very easy number to bring them down evenly. So we'll pump on tank number 1 until its capacity reaches right at 75%, and then we'll switch over to tank number 2, and then we'll bring it down until it reaches 70% capacity of its current capacity volume, not its diameter, but its volume in the tank. And then we'll just keep switching them back and forth until they become even. Now, in the scenario where I've got tanks of unequal diameter and unequal volume, we would step them down by 5% capacity of the tank. When we're looking at sequential dispensing, what we'll do is we'll stay on tank number 1 until it reaches its set point to switch over. Then we'll switch over to tank number 2 until its switch point is set. And then we'll go ahead and look at bringing the tanks down one at a time until they reach the low threshold. So if you're looking at it in summary, the ASTP settings, the two scenarios that you have is alternating STP. Alternating STP, one of them you step by volume. This is for tanks of equal capacity and equal diameter. The other one is if we want to bring them down by bringing them down evenly, it's done by percent of volume, and these are for tanks that are unequal capacity or unequal diameter. If I'm going down with sequential STP, tank capacity or diameter doesn't matter. I can bring them down until I reach the low level threshold. I can bring them down until and switch over on the oldest delivery, or I can actually have a preset volume set in the tank gauge to step them down until it reaches that preset volume, and then it'll automatically switch over to the next tank. Now we'll go back to the gauge and start looking at programming line leak. So now that we've finished alternating STP underneath the Manifolded Lines tab, let's go ahead and look at sensor setup. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the Probe and Sensor tab. It'll bring me back to the IS barriers that you see on vSmart Module 1. And as you can see, I've got 16 sensors connected to one IS barrier. It's the channel 4 on IS barrier number 2. Well, as soon as I hit the icon, it'll bring up all the sensors that are connected. Now, one of the things that you want to look at is that in the order in which you want them to show up on the report, that's really the way that you want to go in and program them. So let's say sensor number 9 is the first one on the report that I want it to show up as, and this is an annular sensor. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it, and as it comes up, it'll show me that it is an interstitial float sensor, small plastic, the model number and serial number of that device, but it also gives me its physical location on the IS barrier inside the vSmart. But since this one is on position number 9 and I want it to be the first one in my report, what I do is I just say this is going to be sensor number 1, and then I give it a name. So this is regular, annular, and then I can go ahead and assign it to tank number 1 on regular, and then hit apply. And that will show up as the first sensor on my report. So now if I come back and look at my position summary, it has now taken that sensor and moved it to the first configurable spot. Then I can just go and complete the rest of the 14 sensors and put them in the order in which I need them to show up on my report. If you have any other questions about configuring probes and sensors, go ahead and look at the configuration manual. Now that we got all the sensors configured in the Integra or the iSite, let's go ahead and program our line leak. First thing you want to do is go back. I've actually found the LLD sensor on vSmart number 2, barrier 2, channel 1. Now you're tempted to go ahead and try to click on that icon to program it like you would a normal probe or a sensor, but a VLLD sensor doesn't program exactly like a probe or a sensor. You actually have to program the LLD underneath the probe. So what you're going to do is go back to your probes that are configured, and I'll go ahead and program this one underneath regular number 1 tank. So this is tank number 1 regular, and if you notice, this little icon will become active once we find an LLD sensor. So let's go ahead and touch the icon, and now we go ahead in the serial numbers, and we're going to go ahead and find the serial number of the LLD that we want to program. So all we're going to do is we're going to grab sensor number 253 and then we're going to give it a name. And we're just going to give it a regular line name. Once you give it a name, go ahead and hit apply. Now all you're doing is linking the LLD to the tank itself. So that way if I need to shut down on a low product alarm, high water alarm, or an aqueous ethanol phase separation alarm, I know what tank to tie to that LLD. Now once it's configured and we save this, now that you've got your LLD configured to the tank, we need to go ahead and program the LIM, which is going to control the pump relay. So if you go back to settings, go back to probes and sensors, let's go ahead and select the LIM interface module. Now we know that we've wired up the regular to the first channel, so we just need to map the channel to the tank. So that way we're tying the relay to the probe to the sensor. So if I select channel number 1, I select regular tank number 1, and then go ahead and hit apply, what I'm basically doing is just completing the map. As soon as you do this, the system will want to try to run a 3 gallon per hour line test. So before you do this, you want to make sure that everything's buttoned up and you're ready to actually run a 3 gallon per hour line test. Then go ahead and click OK. Once you have the LIM configuration complete, you'll need to go back to settings, go under leak detection, and then we're going to go to line leak settings. Under line leak settings, you would go in and grab the regular ID that you just configured. You'll grab the regular LLD that you just configured. It tells you that you're on LIM address number 1, LIM channel number 1, and the serial number. But what you need to do is come in here and actually select how you want this thing to run. The first thing you're going to look at is the number of 3 gallon per hour test. The number that you have right there, we have it set to 5. This is 5 maximum retries that an end user can try before we actually lock down the system, before a technician would have to come out and run a retest. I don't like 5, but I will go normally with 3 because they failed the initial. We would give the manager an additional 3 times to run a test. Now an abort does not count as a fail, but it's 3 consecutive fails in a row that would lock it down so that a technician would have to come out and actually run another line test. The other thing that you have to program is your auto test. If you check the auto test box, you can go ahead and select 0.2 or 0.1. And then your manual test. When you select manual test, this is what you want to run right now. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and select everything except your manual test and then hit apply. The manual test is usually run when you're actually at the site for a technician that wants to run a manual test when he walks up to the console. So as a technician would come in from a failed LLD, you would see this icon right here. It would be surrounded with a red border with a red triangle that is locked down. The first thing you want to do is come to settings, go to leak detection, leak test settings. First thing you want to do is go ahead and select the regular LLD, then go ahead and check the manual test and do run 3 gallon per hour line test or the 0.1 or 0.2. And it's either say I want to run it now or I want to schedule a test. If I run it now and then hit apply, it will go ahead and turn the motor on and complete the test right then and there. But let's say I want to go ahead and run a 0.2 or a 0.1, but I want to schedule it for later in the day or later in the week. I can go ahead and schedule a test for, let's say I want it to run on April 1st. I can go ahead April 1st, 2014 at, let's say I want to run it at 11 p.m. And as soon as I hit apply, it'll go ahead and put it into the calendar. Then on April 1st, I want to go ahead and run an LLD test. Now the one thing you got to remember is that the LLD test could take a couple hours to run a 0.2 or a 0.1, so you definitely want to give your station enough idle time to complete the test. Let's go to the home screen, and you can go in and configure the reports just by going to the Reports tab. And now you have 2 ways of doing reports. You can either do a scheduled report or on demand. A scheduled report is a timed event. These are events that are coming out when you schedule either via the printer or an email, a fax, or a text message. So I have the ability to send out a delivery report, inventory report, reconciliation, auto calibration status, leak test status, sensor status, and active alarm count. So each one of these has the ability to be set up as an action to be sent out at a specific date and time. So if we look at delivery, I'll go in and do a delivery report. So we'll set up a delivery report. I want my delivery report for the regular tank. I want it to come out either once, daily, weekly, or monthly. Well, I'm going to say I want this one to come out daily. Okay, I want it to come out every day, or I can actually have it come out every other day, every third day, every fifth day. It just depends on the frequency that you want it. If I say weekly, I want it to come out, then what day of the week do you want the report to come out on? Well, I want it to come out every Monday, or every Tuesday, or every Wednesday. If I do monthly, then I'm saying I want it to come out on the first day of the month, or the first Tuesday of the month. You set up when you want it to come out and how often you want it to come out. So let's go back. I'm going to say this one's going to come out weekly. I want it to come out every Monday, and then I give it a time. I'm going to say I want to do this at 6 a.m. and then I want it to go out via email. Once I click the email button, it's going to bring me to a tab and it says email. So I go ahead and click the email tab again. It'll bring me back to my contact list. So now I'm going to select someone that has an email address that I want to get the delivery report at 6 a.m. So I'm going to go ahead and select myself. I'm going to hit apply. As you see, it loads my name into the emails that's going to be sent out at 6 a.m. Then I go ahead and hit apply again. Now I'll actually save the settings. And then you'll actually see the email report that's saved now in the delivery calendar. So when I come back to this screen, I can come back to my home menu. And if I go back into reports, go back to scheduler, electronic reports, it brings up the calendar, and if I click on the day, it shows me that I've got a delivery report scheduled. If I come to the details, it shows me that I got an email report ready to go at 6 a.m. and it shows me that I'm the one that's going to go ahead and get it. So we're just going to go ahead and cancel out of this now and then go back to the home screen. So now that we finished the delivery reports that we want to come out at 6 a.m., if I want inventory reconciliation or even a sensor status, I would program the exact same way, and they would just populate the calendar so that you can see how frequently you have reports coming out via email or fax. If I look at the printed output would program the exact same way. The only thing is that it's just going to a local printer connected to the gauge. Same thing if I go into inventory, I can select the regular tank or all tanks. I want it to come out daily, say every day. I want it to come out either Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or every third day, fifth day. If I want it to come out on a weekly basis, I can set it up for either Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or it'll come out on that day. Monthly, yearly, same thing. And then I set up the time. I'll go ahead and set this one up for 7 a.m. and I want it to come out to the default printer, and then go ahead and hit apply. Do you really want to save? Yes, changes have been successfully saved. And now you see that they'll come out every day on Friday. So that's the way that we had it set up. If I want to go back and edit this, I just click the details. I come back and say I don't want it to come out on Friday. I want it to come out every Monday. And then hit apply. Then it'll go ahead and move the dates and change everything. Instead of coming out on Friday, they'll now print out on Monday. Once you've done all your printer reports, on demand is a little bit different. On demand, you're actually looking for information that was saved from prior either printed or electronic reports that have been saved in the system. So let's say I want to come in and look at a delivery. On demand, I'm saying I want to look at my regular tank or by product, and then I say I want to do a date range. So I'm going to say I want to do March 1st through March 15th, and I want to prepare the report. What it's going to do is going to go back into the database and try to find a delivery report between that date range, and it'll pull it up. Once it pulls up the report, and I don't have any in this test system, once it pulls it up, then you have the ability to view every one of the reports that you have, as well as print each individual report, and then you can go ahead and either do it that way or actually go back and look at it through the calendar. Now that you've completely programmed the console, what you want to do is from the home screen, go to your settings button, go to your utilities tab, and now you have the ability to do a backup and restore. Well, there's two backups and there's two restores. The backup configuration is just that. It's just the configuration of the console. The restore configuration is if I have a backup of just the configuration, I can do a restore. So what we tell everybody is that once you've gone through, program the console, do a backup of the configuration. Once you have this, go out, do all of your testing. Go out and test your probes, test your sensors, test all the functionality of the console. And then once you do that, come down and do a cold start. After the cold start is finished, it'll go through a reboot and then come back. Then go back and restore the configuration from where you were prior to setting off all those alarms. This way you don't have all of those events in memory, and somebody can come in, or a regulator can come in and see all those events that are now populated in the calendar. By doing a restore of the configuration before you started, none of that information will be in there. That would probably be the only time that you would use a backup of the configuration or restore configuration function in the gauge. The rest of the time is designed to do it if you're doing maintenance on the console. So let's say 6 months to a year from now, you're coming to the site to do maintenance. The first thing you should do is always walk up to the console, take either your maintenance key out or the LAN cable, and tie your PC into the unit. Go ahead and do a backup of the database. Well, when I hit backup of the database, it says, "Are you sure?" Yes, and it says select the destination. Well, if you're looking for your thumb drive, that'll be disk 2. If you're looking for backing up to the PC, go ahead and select PC, and then hit apply. And then what it's going to do is it's going to ask you, do you want to do this? And it says yes. And it says, okay, where do you want to back it up to? Back it up either to a thumb drive or to your desktop. Just remember where you're going to put it, because you're going to have to find it when you go back to restore the database. So go ahead and say I want to save it to the thumb drive on my PC. Go ahead and click save. It's going to go through, it's take a couple of seconds to do a backup of the database. Now this is a complete backup. It's a complete backup of all the tank tests, line tests, all the reports, inventory data. If you're saving inventory, it saves everything. That way you can go ahead and do maintenance on the console. And when I say maintenance, if you have to do a board change or any other maintenance inside the console where you may destroy a board or damage the configuration or the database, this is what you want to do. Is this way I can rebuild the console and I can put it back exactly the way it was before I walked up. So once you're done doing your maintenance, if something goes wrong, I need to restore the database. So then you just go back to do a restore. Do you say yes? And just go in and say I stored it to the PC. It says, okay, where did I store it in the PC? So let's go to my computer. I see that I have my removable drive. And then go ahead and pick the database that you stored. And then all of a sudden hit OK and open, and it'll automatically go through and say, do you want to restore it? And it'll start restoring the database back to the console. This is a great feature when you've done something, or if you have to do a board change, because let's say a LAN connection or one of the serial connections have been blown out for either a short or electrical connection. This way you can go ahead and restore the unit exactly the way it was after you've changed the main board. It's just a way that we can help keep the database intact. This may take a couple of minutes, but it'll be well worth it if you ever have to use it.